So I'm going to be talking about college transition issues. This applies to a small but growing number of kids on the autism spectrum. When I first got in the field way back when, in the time the dinosaurs roamed the earth, back in 1982, when I moved to Yale to work with Donald Cohen, it was rare to have a student go to college. These days, it's very common. As I mentioned in the introduction, we have about 40 students at Southern who have self-identified, which probably means there's another 40 or so who have not asked for services. And that would be kind of typical around the country in terms of colleges. And we can talk about some of the complexities around colleges and college enrollment and choices and all the stuff. So keep in mind also that college is not the only thing. We have a good number of vocational programs. As you've heard, there are a number of these in the state. They kind of come and go, and you have to kind of keep on top of them. And I think one of the things that often you will discover is by word of mouth with other parents or teachers, you will come across these. So for example, Walgreens has a really great program for supporting students with ASD who want to work for them in their warehouse and shipping. And then there are much smaller programs. Again, these come and go. Pinchbeck's Rose Farm, which unfortunately just folded, was a great program for the more severely disabled. But it was a great day program and a great opportunity. I'm sorry to say it's gone. We also now have some supported transitional programs. There are a couple of really good ones in Connecticut. Chapel Haven, which I have to say I'm on the board of, so I need to disclose that. Thames Academy, which is at Mitchell College up in Groton, New London, I think. And then there are a number of colleges in the state that say they have autism programs. We can come back to talk about that. That turns out to be a really complicated topic, because what you see on paper may not always exist in reality. And that's when the college visit gets to be really important. If you've got a student with ASD, going to visit the schools, but also to look at their levels of support. When you look, many of the schools in the state say they have programs. In fact, these are quite sketchy. Junior colleges increasingly support students. Junior colleges have some advantages and some disadvantages, and we'll talk about that. Some of the students we have at Southern, because they live in New Haven, they stay with their parents, but they go to college. That has some pros and cons associated with it, but it's a reasonable solution for some students. It takes away some of the complexities of dorm living. On the other hand, the dorm living has its own opportunities for learning and growth and development. So that's another one to talk about. Traditional colleges increasingly have an enrollment of students with autism. I've dealt with students at Yale with autism. I've had a number of these days of students, probably between 5 and 10 in classes at Yale. And I have a similar number now at Southern of people who identify as having autism, and they want to let me know when they come to the class, either to get special help or just to let me know given the nature of the class. And the secret good news, again, is that people are doing better and better and better with early intervention and diagnosis. As you heard from our panel of speakers, I think one of the problems is in a state like Connecticut, which is really in some ways still a pretty wealthy state, we don't have enough in the way of resources, we don't have enough in the way of supports, and we need to do a much better job in terms of transition planning. And Bo, I'm counting on you. If I go on for too long at the end, you'll pull the plug.
Sounds good.
Okay, so colleges, some good news about colleges. Colleges came out of monasteries, and why is this good news? Monasteries are very ordered and structured. You get up a certain time, you pray multiple times during the day, there's bells to signal when you come back to pray, there's food on the table, there's reading, there's stuff to do, things to attend, libraries, books. So this actually is a good news story. We can use those routines in college to help students. There are many things that are available. Food shows up at the cafeteria, books in the library, entertainment, all kinds of opportunities for things if you're interested. If you have special interests in science or engineering or computer science, there's opportunities to get yourself involved in that. To some extent, you can minimize your social interaction. It's a complicated issue for people with autism, ASD, because in some ways we like them to have more experience and learn and grow in college, which is true for most people going to college. But it is true that for some students, you can minimize social interaction. Some schools are actually set up to maximize social interaction. And it's important to know that. I can tell you at Yale, one of the things at Yale that really goes on is there's a lot of emphasis on knowing the students within your residential college. It's a residential college system. A lot of emphasis on social interaction, social networking, which goes on then throughout your life. It's a very different kind of a situation. Other schools, they don't care so much. You're going to be rather isolated as long as you get your work done. So it's important to keep in mind. There are some important rules we will talk about in college. So there's some things around classroom etiquette to kind of know for students. And there are some things about the changes from high school to college that can be important to know. And the other thing I think that's we'll talk about more shortly is the importance of being appropriate with fellow students and teachers, for that matter, for guys who are interested in social interaction and want dates. They need some help doing that. Often they've had limited experience, and that can be a disaster if they go about it in a somewhat heavy-handed way, because colleges these days are very intolerant of people who make what seem to be unwanted sexual advances to other students. One of the things I think that really is a great opportunity of the college experience is learning to be your own self-advocate and learning to be in charge. And that's a real transition, obviously, from what was going on in high school, where your parents were heavily involved. Your parents are paying the bills often, but legally and truly in college, you're kind of on your own. And so you have to keep that in mind. Okay. So high school versus college, what are some of the differences? Well, in high school, you have classes 4 to 5 hours a day. You have lunch, you have some recess, you have gym, but you're really going pretty much full bore all the time. That sort of forces you to keep up, as do things like tests and reading and all the rest of it. College, you might have 4 or 5 classes a week. Now, sometimes I'll meet more than once, but it's not nearly the same. And so there's much more of an expectation for self-learning. Some students find this very difficult. In high school, frequent tests, quizzes, exams. All of a sudden in college, not so much. Yeah, there'll be the occasional pop quiz, which can be a source of great anxiety to students with ASD. But most of the time, you're expected to learn on your own, and there's not the weekly kind of test to be sure you've done the reading. So you've got to really be on top of this on your own. Teachers in high school provide much more structure and support. They have expectations for self-organization and learning, but they support these. They check them, they get, you have to do a draft of your paper assignment. You have to do a preview of what you're going to do in terms of your presentation. There are safeguards built into the system to help students make it. Also keep in mind, high school, the maximum class size, 20 to 25 to 30 students. That's a big class. In college, hey, could be several hundred. Could be 200 or 300 people in your Psych 101 class or in your chemistry lecture. So that's, again, a very different experience. And you have to learn to act differently. It's different when you're in a group of 20 people than when you're in a group of 300 people. In a group of 300 people, you cannot always have your hand raised. That's also true in the smaller class. But these issues of classroom etiquette and knowing when things change, high school to college, it's a big difference. Also, high school, it's usually one building, sometimes 2 and a little larger. College, it's a big campus. And you have to get from point A to point B to point C, and you have to know how to do it in an efficient manner. So the transport issues get to be really important. What is the transport like? Do you take the bus? Do you ride a bike? Can you ride a bike? Do you walk? How do you get there? You know where your classes are. And then group projects present special issues for people with ASD. Chemistry, you have a lab partner, or you may have a group of students who are studying together for a project, either in the sciences or for that matter, even in the humanities, where you're doing something together and you're going to do a presentation. So for the student with ASD who has not done that kind of supported that work with a group, it can be a challenge all of a sudden to be thrust into that with the expectation that you're going to be a full and contributing member. Are the kinds of supports in college? Colleges, the good news and the bad news. Colleges are welcoming of students with all kinds of disabilities. You can identify as having ASD when you apply to college. You can identify after you're admitted. You can identify when you can show up, or you can choose not to identify at all. And this is the student's choice. This is not the parent's choice. That's important. Underscore, boldface type. The parent is not involved. The student has to be the one to self-identify. I'll give you an example at the end about this, some cases, if you like. This can be a challenge. The parents sometimes have the expectation, having gotten through grade school, junior high, high school, where they've been very involved, all of a sudden they're shut out. You won't even know the kid's grades unless he or she gives you permission. And for sure, nobody's going to want to talk to you without the permission. And for sure, you can't be the ones to ask for help. So that's kind of important to know. In terms of academic accommodations, the wave of people with autism that is now hitting the colleges has come as a bit of a surprise. The colleges are not always well prepared. They have accommodations. The accommodations they often will offer once you've established eligibility, usually through showing them psych testing or some kind of reports, is that they will give you extra time on tests. They may give you tutoring. That's great. I'm not knocking it. Those things can be very helpful. Often people with ASD need other kinds of supports. You need a regular counselor. You probably need some kind of peer mentoring program. You probably need some kind of tutor in some classes. You need a range of other supports that the colleges may not at first think about. And you need to be able to self-advocate for these. You should also look in advance when you go into the college. What do they say they offer in terms of these supports? Also, my colleague Bo, who introduced me, colleges will often have as well computer supports. And this can be a great thing for the students on the spectrum because they often love computers. And they do well on the internet. They do well with some of these organizational apps and so on. But you have to know where they are. And sometimes the IT people are really your friend. And the people who do assistive technology can help you in terms of knowing this is not assistive technology as if you had cerebral palsy. This is kind of knowing about learning and organizational supports, ways to get your life together and to be fully functional. Social things, awareness of peers and the teacher, being aware of what your impact is on other people. One of the problems that people on the autism spectrum have is they'll try to crack a joke. It's not very funny. Or they will be laughed at for something they have said that was not intended to be funny. So they feel laughed at. That's because that was funny. But they don't appreciate the nuances of things like idiosyncratic language. Somebody says it's raining cats and dogs and they're looking out the window, wondering what that's all about. It's a complicated set of issues, but it's important to know that social awareness, how you act in class, how you act with your friends, how you act with a roommate, how you act on the bus, all these things are important to bring with you into college. How do you manage your money? How do you do the laundry? Where do you take care of yourself? How do you wear the showers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this is potentially a complicated package. And finally, mental health supports. Probably about half of the adults going to college have issues with anxiety and or depression. One of my former students, Scott Jackson, I did an online survey a couple of years ago that came out in the Journal of Autism. And about half of the people, again, an anonymous online survey of college students who self-identified as having autism, and it looked like most of them did, very high rates of depression, anxiety problems, including sometimes suicidal thinking, which obviously is very important to know about. So looking at what mental health supports are around. If you're coming in on a medication for behavioral issues or anxiety and depression, the SSRIs, Prozac, and similar compounds are frequently given to high school students, and they may be continued into college. Then who's going to manage those medications? And keep in mind that nobody is going to make the student take the medications. I'll give you an example at the end of one student who got into some trouble, and his mom's classic question to me when I finally talked to her after I got the kid to the emergency room because he was suicidal was to say, is nobody making him take his medications? And the answer was no, nobody in college makes you take the medication. So that's kind of a tricky business. And to know the mental health supports are highly variable. Mental health supports are a problem around the country. Doesn't matter if you got autism or not. It's an issue in terms of getting a shrink of some kind or t'other, especially for prescribed medications. Who's going to be the prescriber? Who's going to be the manager? Sometimes the person at home is willing to continue to do that, and they can continue to see the student either online or at home. They can do televisits between sometimes. That's a little complicated legally. Sometimes they're willing to do it when the student's home for vacation. But again, just to know and looking ahead of time, what's the campus like? There's some great little schools, wonderful schools out in the middle of the sticks. No Starbucks, as my older daughter would say as she went around and looked at colleges. That was her first question. But also no Starbucks probably means no shrinks, because the place is so small. They may have a social worker come in maybe once a week, and that may not be sufficient. So think about that. And again, if the parents need to be involved, the student needs to give permission to the college to have the parent be involved. Okay. So the academic challenges, timed and untimed tests. Untimed tests are the easiest. As time goes on in life, time becomes more of a pressure. But you can get untimed tests. This requires disclosing and saying, I have a learning issue, I have ASD, I need untimed tests. That can be done. Problem areas, essay questions. This is something that you can actually teach in a very structured way about how to respond, how you have a beginning and a middle and an end. I've actually used things as sort of dumbed down, you'll forgive my saying, as PowerPoint to help students learn how to write papers, because it's visual. You can have it right in front of you. It can scroll along, and then all of a sudden you hit outline, and that outline turns into what's basically the skeleton of a paper. English courses are often a bear, and it's just important to know that, because students aren't understanding the narrative aspects. You read Shakespeare, and unless you're paying attention to that kind of next level of Shakespeare's meaning, you have no idea. Somebody has to translate for you. When Shakespeare says the sun is shining, that means somebody is knowing something. There's knowledge down, right? And that's a translation issue, literally. And you have to have somebody who's willing to work with the student to explain things like that. Group work we talked about before a little bit. This can be an issue in classroom behavior. I have a student I worked with for a long time at Yale, who one of his problems was he told me, he was a physics major. He told me he was being bullied in his physics class. I could not believe it. And I went and attended the physics class with his permission and the professor's permission. And absolutely, he was being bullied. He was being made fun of by the students and the professor in the class. And why was he being made fun of? Because he had his hand up all the time. He was so interested in the topic, he couldn't refrain either from commenting, correcting the teacher, or asking a question. And he was not malicious. He was not doing this to be disruptive, but the other students are making jokes about him. Oh, there goes Joe again. And the teacher was kind of joining in, and I had a chance to talk to the teacher. Afterwards, I said, you realize you're bullying him? He was just aghast. And I said, look, we need a plan to deal with this. And he was on board with it. And so we arranged the kid could ask one question in class and spend 5 minutes with the teacher after. Only one question, and he had to be on board with that one question, and the teacher would always ask him if he had his hand up, but only one time. But again, things like that you can make an impact on, but you have to be able to kind of recognize it. And judicial affairs, this is the sexuality stuff. You cannot go up to girls and comment on their breasts. That's not the way to get to know a girl that you don't know at all, right? I sometimes use the analogy of baseball. You get up to the plate, often you strike out, you foul out, you do whatever. You don't get to first base. Occasionally you get to first base. And what does that mean? Sometimes you get to second base, sometimes you get to third base, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a complicated issue. There is a very good book, I think I'll mention again, by John Miller, called Decoding Dating for adolescents and young adults. John Miller himself is on the spectrum. He wrote this book. He's an English special ed teacher in high school. He works with high functioning kids with autism. And he wrote this book because his students had so much trouble with dating. So he breaks down all the steps. So it's a teachable approach to dating. It's great. How are we doing with time, Bo?
We have about 15 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to rush through this so I have time for questions. College environments, less interaction with the college professor, more expectations of independence. You see on your first day, you've got psych here, physics, bio, sociology. My first bit of advice to students, take all that white space and fill it up. So it should be psych, and then it should be study for psych ahead of time, 2 hours, right? Fill up the whole day, including sleep time, playtime, all of it, so that you have a structure and you're not just wasting time. Fewer tests, again, but covering a much larger area. So more expectations for knowing more material. Lots of changes in the support system. High academics achievement is expected. There's a lot of independence. That can be an issue. I had that same Yale student with the physics problem. He couldn't do the laundry. And the reason he couldn't do the laundry, even at 2 a.m., there'd be Yale students down at the basement of his college, and they'd be doing their clothes, but they'd be having a beer or a smoke of some kind. I'm not necessarily talking about the kind. And he couldn't deal with that. He just couldn't be part of that party. He was sending his mom his clothes every 2 weeks in a big UPS box. She would clean them and send them back to him. It took 2 years to get him to be able to do his own laundry. And here we go. College residential life. Again, the pros and cons. If you're in a junior college, or if you're a college like Southern, you can easily be a day student. You don't have to be involved with residential life. That's a call. It can be a complicated call. There are pros and cons. And again, just to know that there are issues. Some of our students, they don't sleep at night. They like to sleep in the daytime, but they do all their work at night. But this can be a problem if you've got a roommate who wants to have a usual night's sleep. So understanding the rules, working on this, having some supports within the dorm can be very helpful. Tools and supports. Again, there's a lot of stuff out there for digital management of your schedule, of your time, using technology. They have a great range of apps that can be really, really helpful. Even things as simple-minded as your iPhone. My iPhone is sitting over here. It will remind me of my next thing, which is a phone call, I think at 1 o'clock. But it's great because it will pop up 15 minutes before and remind me. Again, things that you can do that organize your life and your day can be really helpful. You can use many of them also to organize things like your test taking, paper writing, et cetera, et cetera. Other things, text to speech, speech to text. There's all kind of adaptive things you can use. Getting a mentor, I think, is really important. There's ways to do this. There can be a college advisor. I've often encouraged students to either volunteer or find a job in a department that interests them, because then they will get to know people. And it could even just be a volunteering to come in a couple hours a day each week to copy for the secretaries in the office. That will put them in touch with people. They will get to meet people. But there are ways to kind of get to know the system and the people. Finding a good college program, again, over 5,000 great college programs in the United States of America. That's a lot. And so you have a lot to choose from. They may make a lot of claims online. I would ask for materials, and I for sure would visit, because sometimes the online claims don't quite convey what's really happening. Also keep in mind, it's the child's college experience, not the parents. I will sometimes have the parent come in and say, well, I really want him to go to so-and-so. And then you see the child, and the child doesn't want to go to so-and-so. The child wants to go somewhere else, or the child doesn't want to go to college at all. So we got a big disconnect. And that's the problem, because it's the child, the student, the young adult, who is going to make this decision as they turn 18. Important strategies, you've heard everybody say, start early. Use online, getting promotional materials, look at what's said, take advantages of summer programs. Sometimes colleges will let high school students in the summer, either before they're admitted or as juniors sometimes, where you get to know the campus. You can take the bus around, you can know the library, get the lay of the land. That's important. And you get a sense of whether it's a good fit. Visit the college. Again, get a sense of what the program is like. If you want to self-identify, that's a good time to do it, to figure out what the supports are. Ask a lot of questions and get a good sense of how well do you fit with this college. Questions to ask: what are the best types of programs? If you have an interest in engineering, right? There's some schools, there's that lovely school up in Vermont that teaches poetry and writing, Bennington. It's so good for you. Other schools, hey, they might be really good for computer science. So knowing that in advance, asking yourself quite honestly, both as a student and a parent, how independent can this student be? Can this student get himself around? Can he do his laundry? Can he get his life organized? Are you going full and part-time? Are you going to live at home or residential? Junior colleges has some pros and cons. which we can talk about in terms of sometimes students will like the junior college experience because they can kind of be there by themselves. Sometimes the problem is they feel like they're smarter than everybody else because they may be. And that's an issue as well. Again, the visit, my goodness, this is taken off on its own. Do your homework in advance. Look at the support staff that are available. Meet them if you can. Remember that unlike public education up to age of 18, or as we've just heard in Connecticut now, up to 22 in some circumstances, public education is a right under the law, under the federal law, to a free and appropriate educational program. But that is not true of college, which is the reason why it's so easy to get kicked out. The law that applies in college is the American with Disabilities Act, where you can ask for appropriate supports and get them. And that's also true in the workplace or in vocational program. Different law, different ways of documenting, different set of issues. Look at the goodness of fit. How well will this student fit to this college? And again, you'll get a good sense of that from the visit. Are there other students there that you can visit? Can you visit the dorms? Can you visit the disability support office? Are there mental health supports available? Do you know other parents? Can they put you in touch with other parents or other students who've gone there, some of whom might have had a disability or learning problem or ASD? Two-year colleges, pros and cons, staying at home, not having to deal with all the stuff related to the dorm. On the other hand, the student may feel badly if they feel like they should have gone academically to a four-year college, because often you get a different sense. Again, it's a choice. There's pros and cons to both. One of the things I think that's important to realize is there can be supports for both kinds of colleges, which you need to think it through in advance. Transitional programs very quickly. We have a number of these around. These have typically several components. Locally, we have Chapel Haven, the Mills College program, which is called the Thames Academy. They work on this whole set of skills here, and then they will have some college exposure classes if that's appropriate. They also encourage student involvement in the community. There's about 75 of these programs around the country right now. If we have time, I'll talk about them. I mentioned these programs. A Landmark is another one. Landmark is a whole self-contained school for students with special needs of various kinds. These are often expensive. Sometimes school districts will pay for a year or two of special supports after high school to get the student into shape to be able to attend a full-time program. These transitional programs are seen as a way station. Sometimes it works that way, sometimes it doesn't, but there are a number of these around the country, a limited amount of data on them. Common problems, students not asking for help, this is the biggest one. A high range of issues in terms of the students and what they need in terms of both academic, social, and mental health supports. And again, for the mental health, have this set up in advance. Don't wait until the child needs the emergency room. The mental health, again, stress management, cognitive behavior therapy has been modified for people in the autism spectrum to be very useful. This can be done by a psychologist, social worker, somebody else who knows about using it. Medications can also be very helpful. Note that around psychiatry issues and mental health issues, confidentiality becomes a big problem or issue. I don't know, not a problem, but it's an issue because parents are not routinely involved unless the child gives permission. Helping this college staff also be aware of any special needs for support. Again, a complicated issue sometimes. And if students come in on medication, it's best to stay on the medication and not immediately discontinue it. Here's a quick example, case examples to kind of end with. Take a guess as to what this student is writing about. Anybody got, I don't know if anybody's got guesses or if they can post them. Bo, you might be able to see if anybody's got a guess as to what this is about. Any guesses?
There's nothing in the chat.
Nobody's going to guess. He's asking the question, will I ever have a girlfriend? Right? The fact that he's asking the question this way tells you we got a major problem, right? Houston, we got a problem on this one. And if you look at the bottom, he says 0 equals 0. And he's coming to the right conclusion, but through the wrong mechanism, which is he needs to work on something other than math to be able to get a girlfriend. This is a guy who's a math genius, but who cannot walk into McDonald's and get a cheeseburger and change. So in summary, there are many programs. Now much progress has been made. The students were offered a range of opportunities. The main thing I would say to parents and students is do your homework and do your visit. And I think that's it. I can give you other case examples, but probably better to open up to questions if people want to ask questions.